scarier places were Italy.
Really? Italy was scarier than China? Nowhere.
Yeah.
The mafia was there. But I always think there's like a Chinese mafia, but the Italian mafia is more badass.
Yeah, the Chinese mafia, for whatever reason, wasn't interested in transportation.
Yeah, I guess they're badass, but they're just not working in your area. That's fair. But the Thai mafia was in the taxi area.
Yeah, the Italian, and it was there. We had a female general manager in Milan,
yes,
and they posted her face all over the city saying, "Kill this woman."
CEO and co-founder. The Lonsdale, the founding partner of Beach. Now I'm here, co-founder Joe Lonsdale.
My friend Emil Michaels, one of the great operators, deal makers, mentors of CEOs in the technology world. He was the chief business officer at Uber, which he built with Travis. Some of the most interesting stories of the most intense operational times in the tech world, dealing with the mafia, coming into countries all around the world, learning how they work to fight cartels, to have the good guys win. Before he was at Uber, he sold Tellme to Microsoft. He was involved in the defense world in Afghanistan. A really great immigrant story where his parents came over from Egypt with him when he was young. Emil is a great American, has really great stories, and one of the most interesting guys we know in the world of tech and operations. Let's hear from him. I'm Joe Lonsdale. Welcome to American Optimist, Emil Michael. Emil, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here, Joe.
You were the chief business officer at Uber. You basically built Uber with Travis in the group, and lately you're doing a lot of investing and other things here in Miami. Tell us about your background. You grew up in Egypt, is that right? Your family came over from Egypt?
Yeah, I was born in Egypt. My family is Coptic Christian, so it's the 10% minority in Egypt, but the country is now 120 million people, so there's like 12 million Christians there. Mm-hmm. And just like a lot of these countries, we have sort of a lopsided religious framework. Well, the smaller religion doesn't get as much opportunity as larger ones. So there was a diaspora in the 70s among the Christians. And frankly, the U.S. was incredible in granting green cards. So my dad applied for a green card 3 times, finally got one.
Wow.
And then I moved here when I was an infant. And my sister was actually born here. And we landed in New Rochelle, in Westchester County, of all places in the country to land.
Tell me about immigration policy, because obviously it's a huge deal for you. I imagine your family, you came here, you've been very successful in America. We have a lot of debates what's going on right now. Like I think we have 8 million people who have come across the border illegally. How do you feel about this?
It's disappointing in so many ways for 2 reasons. Number one, a country is not a country without a border, right? And not being able to control who comes in means you can't serve those who come in very well. And if the idea is we have a melting pot, so that everyone who comes in here, we take care of. They're entitled to a public education, to the resources to give them a chance to succeed. Well, you can't do that when it's uncontrolled. Yeah. So that's one piece. The second piece is, my family did it the right way. We waited. We couldn't bring our cousins and our families in. We had to sort of go through all the rules that are required. Mm-hmm. And by the way, every one of those that in my family who eventually came in is doing something important and loves their work and is contributing back to the society. And we all bought into this melting pot concept. Yeah. We're all American first, and then where we came from second.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. Well, that's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
We got an interesting confrontation at the border. We're going to see what happens there. So you went undergrad at Harvard, law school, Stanford. Tell us about your alma mater. What's going on in higher education? Are you one of the people like signing up to try to support our friends who are trying to fix Harvard? What's going on here? Yeah.
Totally. I mean, what a disaster it has become. It's embarrassing. And there was an incident even before this latest incident with the Harvard presidents in front of Congress where the Stanford Law School had a conservative professor from the 8th Circuit or something come to speak, and he got shouted down, and some protesters told him they wish his daughters were sexually assaulted. That was sort of on the way in.
They wish his daughters were assaulted because they disliked his views so much.
Right.
And it was the DEI dean. I remember she got suspended or something for this.
She got fired ultimately for this.
Which at least is good, but there's like hundreds of other people like that at these schools, right?
And Stanford Law School is 180 people, so it's a pretty tight community. So it caused a battle for them. And then the dean of the law school wrote, hey, we're a First Amendment first kind of place. And then they're creating a search committee for the new dean, and they put the person who said all these awful things on the committee. The search committee, yeah. So I just had the call with them the other day, and I'm wondering, these institutions don't really get what's happening in the world around them, and that 49% of the country, views the world a certain way, and we're not going to get to a good place if we're shouting down the other side. And that's the opposite of what academia is supposed to be, right?
It seems like these places have just really fallen the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, would you still choose Stanford and Harvard for your kids right now with what you're seeing there? Would you how would you approach this?
It's a great question. I mean, because you're weighing the prestige of the place against what you know it is, and what you know it is now is a place where people are walking around with fear to not say what they think. They're not challenging their ideas. That means they're not coming out as fully formed adults with the ability to critically think through problems and solve them. So it is a question whether I would want someone to go there versus University of Florida, where Ben Sass
He's
has
done
done
work
a
there.
really good job sort of taking the politics out of school and letting people speak and debate and come out critical thinkers.
Ben Sass is a friend. We text and stuff. We're building a new university in Austin.
Yes,
so
I
hopefully
do.
We can create an alternative for your kids there.
Yeah,
These things.
that's right. When ATX is ready for them, which it should be.
We got to get the status and the prestige to be above these old places.
That's the plan.
I don't know if a Harvard guy would allow that. That's the,
Of course we ain't allowed to.
all right. Well, you have more prestigious stuff than Harvard, fortunately, you've done. Let's jump to your early career in tech. So you started at Tellme. It was an early speech recognition company, and you helped to grow it till it was acquired by Microsoft. It was 2007, Microsoft bought it?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we started the company in 99, and we were one of the few lucky companies that raised $100 million, which was a lot of money then.
That was a lot.
A lot of money in August of 2000. And the internet economy started to get wobbly in about March of 2000.
Yeah, Peter tells how about they barely got a raise on a PayPal in early September, so right after that.
Right after that.
And then everything crashed.
Right. So
you just in time got a bunch of money.
right. So which means you were default alive, right, to use Sachs's term, and everything else was down. So now you said, okay, now I have a pile of money.
Yeah.
Does my business model work? It certainly doesn't work with all these people. So we had to, unfortunately, do a big layoff.
Big riff, basically.
Big riff. And then had to take the business model we had, which was kind of a consumer thing. Like you called on your phone, which we didn't have smartphones at the time, and said, hey, I want my Eagle score, and I want the stock price of Palantir. And
That's why it's called Tellme. You call it and ask about it.
it was like a Yahoo on the phone. And Yahoo people used it for information at the time, right? You had your whole day planned in front of you there. That didn't work. So then we pivoted to it sounds boring, but selling automated phone systems to big companies like American Express, Fidelity, where you'd call up and say, hey, my account number is blank, my address.
So you changed enterprise.
Yes, overnight.
And speech recognition technology wasn't that good back then. So what worked? It was good enough to do things with the computer? Did you secretly have people in India on the other side? Like, how did this work?
Like Cruise did? No, we had it didn't work well enough, but it worked well enough with what's called directed dialogue. So I know I'm asking you what your account number is, and then I'm now listening for your account number. And the chances I got it are really high. And actually, the one big win we had was doing directory assistance. So you called, I don't know if you remember, 1-800-555-1212. You wanted the 800 number for Delta Airlines, for American Express, and we killed it. We got like 75% of calls automated relative to operators. So we brought the cost down from $2 to 50 cents.
Amazing.
And we made a lot of money doing it. So we grinded, and that company got to about 100 million in revenue, which again was a lot at the time.
Yeah, that's
And
serious.
in 2007, we sold it to Microsoft. And right before 08, we tried to sell this thing in
Good
08.
time. So you basically got really good timing, raising just enough money in time, and then selling it before everything crashed.
Yeah.
And then,
although sometimes I was like, maybe I shouldn't have raised that 100 million because I would have went to Google early on or something, but that didn't work out.
I read you had like a few $100 million offer on the table, and you spent an hour with Steve Ballmer and got that offer way up to 800.
Yeah.
How did that work?
So we had an offer from a company called Nuance, which Microsoft also eventually
They
bought.
eventually bought Nuance, yeah.
And it was kind of a crappy small company like we were, and they were offering us 300 million in their private company stock. So I got Hadi Partovi. I don't know if you know the name, but he and I and Ollie and David Wadden were all fraternity brothers at Harvard in the same year. And Alfred Lin and Tony Hsieh. We all graduated.
You
Harvard.
guys were all the same Harvard guys. Wow.
Because it was 1994. So if you were in tech, 94, and you had ambition to be other than a banker or a consultant, you went into tech, right? The outcasts of us went into tech. And I turned this 300 and I said, Hadi, you got to tell Balmer we need to talk to him. And he's like, turns out I'm going jogging with him this morning.
That's funny.
He got us a 15-minute meeting, flew up to Seattle, and Balmer saw my BlackBerry on the table. He dumped his drink on it because Windows OS was his major thing. And I was like, great. Now I have no phone, no nothing. In front of Steve Ballmer.
He literally just destroys your BlackBerry
Yes.
for bringing it. That's hilarious.
But within 2 hours, we had a handshake on a deal for $760 million. His corp dev guys were going nuts because he was making deals on his own.
That's funny.
He took the computer to do the math on a spreadsheet that showed in a screen on the room. And we stayed there the weekend. We walked out with a term sheet the next Monday morning.
Wow.
And the rest was history. It was the best deal we could have possibly done. Yeah.
So you've had this, you have this big exit. Just assume the first time you're very wealthy, liquid. But you could just move to Miami then and it'd been good. So what happened? How do you end up at Uber? What's the next step here?
Right. So I'd done 9 years at Tellme from the beginning to the end because I'd stayed with Microsoft for about a year and a half. So I was pretty exhausted.
Yeah.
And, selling enterprise software, because I ended up being a salesman. I carried a bag. I traveled
I
the
know.
country.
I built quite a few of these things. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And a lot of shaking hands and kissing babies and steak dinners and all these things. So I did that for so many years. So I said, I want to do something that's more consistent with the passion I had in college, which was doing something for our country, public service, government.
I love it.
So I applied to the White House Fellowship Program, which was a nonpartisan program that took 15 people in mid-career and put them at the top of government and said, we're going to attach you to a cabinet secretary. So I got selected. I got attached to Secretary Robert Gates, who's defense secretary, and he was the first defense secretary to be in a Republican and a Democrat administration. He was an old guard.
That's good. So not nonpartisan. Defense works best when it's nonpartisan.
Yes.
It's today too. It's really important.
Yes, it is really important. So I got to sit with him as a special assistant, and he was charged with winding down the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So I spent, I did 6 trips to Iraq, 5 trips to Afghanistan.
And that's why we got out of Iraq and Afghanistan in 2009. Thank you, Emil.
Yeah, right. I tried my best, but at least I did 2 things. I was able to deploy some basic mobile phone technology there because what was happening is we were paying the local Afghani troops like $200 a month to keep them to not join the Taliban.
Yikes.
And the Taliban would then pay them $300.
And they join anyway.
And they
$500 was a much better deal.
But more interesting, the warlords who were leading these young men were taking the $200 for themselves.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So we then did a mobile payment system so that we could pay them. They got to keep it. And we would prevent the warlords from taking it. And then we sort of were able to consistently get them on their side. So they wouldn't be doing IEDs against us.
So you're basically paying them not to attack us. Some of them maybe still were, though. Like, how do you know that? What's the verification system? What's the anti-fraud system here? It seems like they would just scam us.
The number of IEDs on Airport Road. And if you remember,
so there's a metric just to reduce that.
Reduce that. Whatever we can do. And then we built V-shaped hulls, which is trying to get the military to quickly move on a piece of equipment, which is pretty simple. I was like hammering on defense contractors. Like we all we need is the bottom of the car to be a triangle. And
so it's harder for it to blow up on this stuff.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Palantir did a lot of work on the IED stuff in the region, trying to track out the bad guys who was doing it. I guess you'd find it's interesting. Like, do you found times you pay people and they would just trick you a lot, or was it pretty common?
Well, once they got the money, they were okay. But we had money to burn. So
was it really about money? Because I it's all these rich people who hate us too, though. So it's like, but a lot of them were just desperate and just needed the money.
They didn't care. And they just want to be able to feed their families. Anyone was able to help them do that. Taliban weren't. We were, except when the money was getting stolen. So we got it not stolen. And I was on JIADO, which is the Joint IED task force. So we would do crazy things like sprinkle markers into the fertilizer plants in Pakistan that were used to make the IEDs so we could track them.
And track where it's coming from.
Shut it down. So I was because I was the tech guy, I was involved in all these tech things.
So when you sprinkle the markers into these things and you later found them, did you get to go back and shut down the plant? Like what would happen to the guys running the plant?
We went to Pakistan and said, this plant is selling material to terrorists.
So they would shut the plant down, the guys would leave the plant and go start another plant instead.
Or they'd do an interrogation of the people working on plants, say who was taking material out of the side.
Figure out who the bad guys were.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I mean, I totally believe, obviously, from your success,
Yeah.
you guys are competent people doing this. I never understood like the big strategy for the next 10 years. Like,
Yeah.
because we ended up being there 10 years more.
Yeah.
It's a mess. Like what was the plan at the time? That we're just going to be here for 10 years and keep doing this? Was there like an end goal in mind? Like how are people thinking about it? How do we screw this up?
We screwed this up in so many ways. Do you remember the surge?
Yeah.
Right? So President Obama, I think the military guys like who were there at the time didn't want to lose, and what losing to them, a certain loss now versus a unclear loss later, even with all the expenditures, that was okay for the military folks. So this is why we have a difference between civilian authority over military.
Because it's not their money. They're
Right.
fine just to keep going, just not to lose.
That's not to lose. And so we ended up putting more troops in there after 2009.
But without any clear goals of where we were going
That's
with the
right.
country. I mean, and the country's obviously a mess. It's going to be a mess. It's a tribal thing from 2,000 years ago. They were never going to fix it all. But did they have in mind, like, it's not like I remember they started doing like these things where we're trying to build like educational institutions and infrastructure, but it's like they think they were going to somehow bring them into the 21st century. It doesn't make any sense.
There is no way you could take a country that doesn't want to move into the 21st century into the 21st century, no matter how many schools you bought.
So if we go back to 2009 and you're President Obama or you're the main advisor to him telling him what to do, like what should we have done at that point?
Even if you go back to 2001 after 9/11,
Yeah.
you have to have more, and this is part of why I like companies that, that Palmer Luckey's building and so on, is you have to use the least amount of force to get the most impact. Drones, you do decapitations, maybe you did a lot more bombing in Tora Bora, but sending hundreds of thousands of troops
It's not
into
necessarily.
Kabul for what? To do what?
Yeah, so the bad guys hit us, we got to kill them and deter them.
Yeah.
But we don't need to be hanging out there with bases, which that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, why should you do that anymore? We got Suleiman. Where did we get Osama bin Laden? We got him in some, country house in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So we spent 15 years trying to get him in a country house in Pakistan. So, use intelligence, special forces, smaller weapons, smaller footprint, make them guess what we're going to do and what we're not going to do.
That was what Palantir was about when we
That's right.
started. It was build the very best intelligence
Yes,
possible.
that's right.
And then use that to...
Yeah. Well, these days of sending hundreds of thousands of ground troops into a meat grinder is nothing this country should ever do again.
Yeah, well, totally agreed. So, Emil, you served our country, you helped make it a little more confident, which I appreciate there. You had an interesting mess in Afghanistan. And then your next big chapter is Uber. So tell us about that. You took a couple of years talking with Travis before you joined, right?
Yeah, he came down to visit me while I was in DC because he was launching DC. It was it was the third city. He said, "You got to join me." And I said, a black car service for rich people. I don't know. Yes, I'd like to use it. Maybe Garrett Camp would like to use it, but I'm not sure.
Because black cars used to be this like super high status thing, right? It was like a marker that you had money. It's like Mr. Big and Sex and the City.
Yeah,
It was
right.
like, and it's like when this, but we don't think of it that way anymore. But that's how it was at the
That's
time.
what it was.
Yeah.
And it was all Lincoln Town Car. And sometimes they were stretched.
I forgot you started with the really nice ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course you guys did.
And then the Lincoln Town Cars actually got discontinued by Ford. And we started, and they started saying like, well, why don't we make this an everyman product? Every man with a Toyota Prius, and every rider who wanted to get to the airport didn't want to pay more than a taxi, but wanted reliability. Why don't we do that? Then I saw it. And I was like, okay, this product's for everybody.
Got it.
And then I came to him and I said, okay, now it's time for me to join.
So you were skeptical when it was a high end
Yes.
thing, but then when you realized, but a lot of things are like that. They start at the high end and then they come to everyone, right? So as a chief business officer, I mean, you guys had a crazy run. You raised what, like for the $15 billion in a few years?
Yeah.
Like how much did you raise?
We raised $15 billion between June of 14 and June of 16. So in 2 years.
Amazing.
So all that fundraising we did, I was there for 4 years,
Yeah.
was concentrated in 2 years.
I remember there were like all these people trying to invest in tech in the US at the time. You guys took full advantage of this. It was very impressive.
Everyone's like, oh, you're only a ZERP, phenomenon. I was like, no, we weren't. We would have done it anyway, but we were leading the charge.
But you
on
went
that.
much faster because of
Yes.
that. You had to open like dozens of cities. Did you help create the playbook for this? Like how would you open a new city? How much work was it? Were you running all around?
So I did the hardest countries. I did China. I did Russia.
Wow.
I did Saudi. Just the places that had a mixture of, you couldn't just drop a money bomb there. You had a political thing. You had a PR thing with the U.S. given our relationship with them.
Did people ever get put in jail in these places for anything?
there were people. I think in some places people did a trip to jail, then trip out, like in Hong Kong,
Yikes.
where the rules are strict, or in Japan or in France, where certain traffic tickets got you put in jail overnight. It wasn't me, thankfully, but yes, mostly it was because it was a corrupt taxi system, and we were trying to blow it up, and that corruption was everywhere in the world. I mean, every transportation.
Yeah,
system.
basically, as taxi places have like some kind of version of medallions and cartels everywhere. Cartels are scary though. Cartels find ways to put you in jail when you fight them. Like going to China to fight a cartel would to me be like the stupidest thing to do for your career. Like, were you ever nervous like going into these communist countries that you're fighting these guys who are connected?
So here's the crazy part: the Chinese loved us. You know why? It's because we had a competitor, Didi, a local competitor, and if you're a mayor in China, you're like, the last thing I want is a Chinese tech, rideshare monopoly. So Uber, come in here.
Why don't they want the monopoly for themselves?
They weren't on. So this was in the early part of Xi's term, where they were like, no corruption. So you got caught being corrupt. It was bad. This was such a visible thing.
It was useful to actually scare people to behave.
Yeah. So it was useful to scare people to behave there. So then they loved having Uber and Didi there because that meant lower prices for consumers and so on. Scarier places were Italy.
Really? Italy was scarier than China? Nowhere.
Yes.
Because the mafia was there. But I always think there's like a Chinese mafia, but the Italian mafia is more badass.
Yeah, the Chinese mafia, for whatever reason, wasn't interested in transportation.
Yeah, I guess they're badass, but they're just not working in your area. That's fair. But the Thai mafia was in the taxi area.
Yeah, the Italian, and it was there. We had a female general manager in Milan, and they posted her face all over the city saying, "Kill this woman." They snuck into her apartment at night and hung a sign from her apartment to the apartment across the road saying she has a relationship, is the nice word of saying, with the taxi commissioner. They really targeted her for physical harm.
Wow.
And so Italy today still barely has true ride sharing because of that. Yes.
The mafia successfully pushed back on this.
The one country.
That's amazing. Yeah. Were there certain playbooks when you when you open a city, what does that look like?
Yeah, so here was the idea. You took a 30-something former Bain consultant, because they had a little chip on their shoulder relative to McKinsey consultants.
the one step down. I got it. Okay.
They wanted to win. They're more analytical, so less theoretical in strategy and more like, okay, I'm going to do this. And we created a launch team, and we said, your job is to go launch Kenya. And you're American. You don't speak the local language. You're going to go there, and you can't leave until you do two things. You create liquidity in that market. Liquidity meant you could get a ride in 10 minutes or less anywhere in the city. Wow. That means you have to find out where the drivers are. You have to market to consumers. You have to do all this stuff to get to liquidity. And number two, you had to hire a local to replace you. And you do those two things, then you can go off and launch the next
Then you get to do the next one.
Yeah.
And what was the incentive? You get like more shares for having launched new cities. You get more bonuses.
You were higher up on the leaderboard that everyone in the country saw.
Everyone's on this leaderboard, and you get higher up.
It's human competition, and it was fun. It was fun competition, but sure, those people got rewarded, more stock, more.
Were there? Did a lot of people who climb that leaderboard end up going on to build great companies?
Absolutely,
it must be a great talent pool.
An amazing talent pool, very aggressive. Now, these are not tech engineer type product types. These are operational, business unit owner types. And they've spread all over the valley in great positions.
I've encountered a few of them over there before. So they're really good people to hire from. That's awesome. I'm very bullish now on operations alongside tech because of everything going on. I remember going on a walk with you after you joined Uber, and it sounded like just a really, really intense thing that you were in the middle of. Like, was there something about your personality that helped you kind of confront and deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a night owl, so. And maybe it was because during the day I was with Travis all day, and he was intense, and we sort of fed off each other in that. But when you're a company of 300 people, say, and you're operating already in 24 time zones, that means the missiles are flying at you all the time. Regulatory. There was an accident.
I assume you'd wake up and you'd check, and there'd be a bunch of new things going on.
Yeah. Right. And that's when you get to sleep at midnight because. China was 15 hours ahead from West Coast time, right? So you finish your Chinese calls at midnight. And it was just a barrage of opportunity and a barrage of problems. And then every day getting up and saying, how do we finance this incredible juggernaut? And then how do we finance Uber Eats? And then how do we finance what would have been Instacart had Travis and I continued there?
Yep.
And so we were just ambitious.
And I feel like this was one of the first companies. It was right around the time when the press really started to turn on tech. So they really turned on Uber. Like why did that happen? I think is it just a broader societal thing, and you guys were the obvious target, or was there something else that you think you could have done differently?
So a couple things. So compare Brian Chesky and Travis personality-wise. Started at the same time, and some of it has to do with just how the leader approaches it. And now I would argue that Brian Chesky could not have built Uber with the personality, and
you would have had to be a little more aggressive.
Yeah, you had to be, because your people are going to jail.
Yeah, the taxi medallions are much more. The taxi cartels are much more intense than he was dealing with. The hotels are not quite that mean. Basically,
it's not a cartel; it's a bunch of corporations and their labor unions. So a different fight. And then number two, 2016 election happened, and we were on the West Coast, and the anger from the population that was like, couldn't believe that the president was elected. January 20th, Trump put the Muslim ban into effect. Yep. And a few days later, we had the first Delete Uber campaign, which was the first true blow up. And it was because we decided to reduce surge for the protesters at JFK Airport. And we said, hey, you want to protest? We'll take you home. We won't raise the prices on you. The taxi guys said that we were undercutting their own protest on the same thing. And it turned into a nationwide Delete Uber campaign. We lost 500,000 customers.
Hold on, but you were trying to help the protesters. So that's a mistake, Emil. You shouldn't have done that.
It doesn't matter.
You shouldn't help these people.
Right?
That's funny, but you got to get punished for trying to help these guys. That's hilarious.
And so 500,000 customers Uber, that was like, $500 million of market cap. We just lost that one day.
Wow.
Because of that. And it was very easy to protest. I'm against whoever made this policy. Delete this off my phone. Yeah. Screenshot it. Instagram.
It's one of the first times this happened.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it didn't hurt Uber that much, or did it?
No, it did. It was the beginning. And then, we took the thing about our taking investments from the Saudis, Susan Fowler, workplace culture.
They just kept finding it.
Yes.
The workplace culture obviously had to be intense. It was intense. I mean, are there other cultures today you see that are as intense as Uber was back then? Is that a thing you've seen around otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, look at Coinbase and Brian Armstrong's statement about what is culture.
Well, I really like that. Well, he's just trying to take out some of the politics out of that.
Which
that's what you guys did too.
Yeah, that's what we did too. It was very similar, and it was a very transparent, radical candor place. And 99% of the people who went through Uber say it was the best experience of their life. What you read about from
is the 1% is angry,
and so is that 1%. And I think people are really longing for that culture again in business. Like you're mission oriented, you're intense, you're trying to win. I can't imagine Palantir was that much different.
It was we were skipping weekends the first few years for sure. I was like, I totally disagree with Dustin Moskovitz thing where he's like, oh, you can work 40 hours a week and be just as successful. I'm like, I know they were working 90 hours on Facebook for the first several years. I'm like, come on. I think it's. I mean, I'm sure there are types of work-life balance that are healthy in some contexts, but when you're creating like a hyper-growth startup, it's like trying to win a gold medal in the Olympics. You're going for it, right?
And if you go home and the rest of the team is there, and you're like, "Hey, we succeeded," you're like, "Well, you didn't."
The leader has to set the tone. Yes. If the leader's not crazy intense, like however intense the leader is, everyone's gonna be a little bit less intense.
Yes,
this is true today at my firm as well. Like they have to see you doing it all the time, or they're not going to.
They're not going to. That's right. People follow leaders.
But it's like some of these things when they're working, it's like for me, it's like one of the most interesting and fun things to be is in that kind of intensity, right? It's like, so you kind of look for that.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll ever have that again in your life? Like something like that?
Man, I look for it. I dream about it every day. I was, when I have been to OpenAI, I feel some of that intensity. When I went to this company, Zipline the other day, I felt an intensity.
Is that the delivery thing?
The drone delivery thing that's delivering medicines and vaccines.
That's super cool.
Yeah, very cool. The intensity when you walk in the office and this is San Francisco at a Friday at 5 and then everyone's there.
I love they still have that going there. No, we still have that in some of our top defense companies, maybe some of our top new AI things too. It's exciting, right?
It is exciting. It's because people feel like they're on the frontier and they can help push it in.
Exactly. You're changing the world and you're part of this positive force.
Yeah.
You zooming out on the gig economy is some term everyone used to use. We don't talk about it as much anymore now. There's AI and stuff. But like, did the gig economy live up to its promise? Did it achieve what it was supposed to? Like was it positively impactful overall?
I mean, I can't even see an argument in any way where it wasn't. And again, this is the political sort of view versus the actual reality view. Uber over time has probably paid $100 billion to drivers. $100 billion. The entire taxi system probably only ever paid, $100 million after 50 years of existence. So many people got access to money in a flexible way than the decades before them, in just the last decade. And so, yes, are you saying that limo drivers now make less today than they would have ever? Sure, there are some casualties there, but you now can guarantee a ride to the airport. And do you remember trying to get a taxi in San Francisco, Joe, when we lived there?
It was
to
horrible.
the airport. What would you do? Well, they didn't show up.
You basically employed a full-time driver if you could afford it.
If you could afford it.
That was the thing to do.
Or else you had a friend drive you. And your friend were like 2 people's time wasted driving. So it was all for the better. It gave people enormous earning opportunities. And guess what? If you don't like it, you don't have to do it the next day. I didn't make enough. I didn't like it.
Of course.
And so
that's what people forget. It's not like they're being forced to drive for Uber. Like they're looking at the numbers. A lot of people still argue, well, Joe, they're not making enough to cover their costs. Well, I'm like, people are not as stupid as you think, right? They would just stop doing it.
they have a car payment, an insurance payment, and gas.
And,
Are they not making enough to cover that? And then some? Why would they do it?
Obviously, and I think people understand markets very well. It's very annoying. It's our friend. I love Joe Green, but he's like always like, she's like back then. He's like, it's not paying them enough. It's wrong. I'm like, dude, it's like I think it's like this. It's, unfortunately, on the left, it's an arrogance where they assume people just don't know what they're doing. I saw a great story about this also. Apparently, there's the guys who come here from other countries, just work on Uber really, really hard for like a couple of years, and then they buy like apartment complexes back in these other countries. So I thought it was kind of a neat thing. Like, just get their whole family set up back home and then go back and do it.
Yeah, and it's I had the same argument with Joe, and then I'm like, Joe, then why do you keep taking Ubers? It's just I gotta get around.
Exactly.
And he said, do you talk to drivers? Are they happy? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, give me a break.
It's funny. Yeah, maybe we just shouldn't interfere with people in a market.
Yeah, maybe just let them do their thing.
Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit to leadership lessons. You're a master negotiator and communicator. Do you have a framework for how you approach some of these high stakes conversations? Can you teach us a little bit about that?
Yeah. And I like to call myself a little bit more of a deal maker than a negotiator because I like to think that I make deals happen that wouldn't otherwise happen because I'm able to pierce sort of the human emotion that sometimes gets in the way of deals and pierces sort of different math that people are doing their own math. They're not doing the other person's math to see where you can intersect and find a place of agreement. And I guess the first thing I learned early on is to walk the line between humility and confidence. You don't want someone who's too arrogant, but you don't want someone who's a pushover either. It's
a tough line.
It's a tough line, but if you can walk that line where you can walk into a room and be humble if you're working with a CEO and you're a director at some startup, but
guys like you and me have to pretend to be a little more humble than we are. I know how it works.
But if you can flex between those two, that CEO, and I walked in the CEO of AT&T or American Express when we were doing it, or early days at Uber, and no one really knew Uber, and they respect the fact that I was confident, but also I was humble and say, hey, I really, here's what you would bring to my company, and I'll really value that, right? So that was one lesson, and that goes up and down the 8 scales. The second is be over-prepared. I work my ass off before any negotiation, before any
just know all the details on both sides. Everything. Yeah.
Where you went to college, what your favorite team was. Again, if it was available, who you're married to, when you got married to.
Interesting.
Where were you in your career journey? Were you trying to get promoted, or were you already at the top? What are the things that matter to you? Because that comes through in your negotiation style.
Yeah.
Right. So then I knew if you were like, I got to get to Tahoe in like 30 minutes, buddy, so you better wrap this up. I tried to jam in my points in the last 30 minutes. I really did try to understand the person holistically. And then third, always be on top of creating the next deadlines, compelling event. Look backwards for when the deal needs to get closed. Have people emotionally commit to the steps they're in. And usually people miss deadlines all the time, but they feel bad when they promise you, I'll get back to you Tuesday. They don't get back to you Tuesday, remind them.
Remind them.
How about Thursday? They're like, okay, fine, Thursday.
We call this process engineering. It's super important.
Yes.
I think it's really bad when people don't actually pace the process ahead of time, how it's going to work.
Yeah. And then ideally, in a negotiation for financing, you want to bring the process of many different parties up at the same time so you have choices. And you could drive the valuation and stuff. So the process in that case was creating an auction environment. Right? It's not always an auction environment, but in fundraising it tends to be.
No, totally.
Yeah.
And so you mentor and advise a lot of CEOs. What are some mistakes you see young entrepreneurs making?
So in this last cycle that you and I have been through, this is our third probably, right? The 2021 valuation peaks were so high.
I know.
That getting entrepreneurs to understand that that peak is gone, just assume it's gone forever.
Yeah.
And now start from first principles. What are you trying to build? Do you actually have product market fit? How much money do you have in bank? How are you burning? Do you need to be burning that much? That took like 6 to 12 months to get people to understand that those times aren't coming back.
Oh, yeah.
Just not coming back. And
It's very difficult because everyone wants to give you money, and it's a whole different world now.
it's just a whole different world. It's good. It's people, we used to call it FOMO. I said, we're JOMO. There's joy in missing out now. People are like, oh, that seemed too expensive. Thank God I didn't touch that.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
No, I mean, I wish you could go back a couple of years knowing what we know now. Yeah. I did raise a lot of money for some of my companies, though, which was great. We had I think 50 rounds in 2021 in my portfolio that were greater than 75 million, in size. So it's like there's just a lot of money flying around.
There's a lot of money sitting in balance sheets right now. So, but the point is, even if you did get that money, you still have to operate differently in this environment because you're not going to get that money again.
You have to. It's really hard if people have too much money. You have to really know that it's like you have to pretend someone's not there, basically, because it's bad for discipline.
It's bad for discipline, and it's bad for you're bad for liquidity, and you're going to be spending money on weird projects and so on. So the hardest thing to get entrepreneurs is to accept that. And maybe I didn't accept it the first bubble we went through and got burst. Yeah. But I literally tell entrepreneurs, I know you're not going to listen to me, but you really are not going to be able to raise more money. You have to do a riff now, and you have to start slimming the company down. 6 to 12 months later, they get it. But then they do 1, 2, 3 more riffs, and they still the speed at which people react.
They need to cut right away. Yeah, it's hard.
And you have to sit in a room and say, what do we have product market fit, or was it just because we had a money bomb dropped on us? And if we don't, how do we get it, right? And if we do, how do we make sure we're exploiting it, in the maximum way possible?
100%. Let's talk about talent. You said you want to prioritize the talent even over a great product early on. Like, why is that?
When I imagine myself sitting around Uber or Tellme, I looked around that talent. I was like, man, this business model can change, but these people are going to find whatever the best business model is, given the idea we started with. And they are so passionate that they're going to drive it through. And that was true at both companies. We didn't know we were going to do Uber Eats at Uber. We didn't know we were going to go into China and Russia and all these places. Today, the company's worth $130 billion. At the time, it was $300 million.
Wow.
And those people around the table, many of them are still there, actually.
What would it have been worth if it wasn't screwed up?
600 million, probably
600 billion?
5x. Yeah, 600 billion.
600 billion?
Yeah,
wow.
5x. We would have been Instacart. We would have had a payment system because we'd have so much share of wallet.
Yep.
There was so much more we would have done.
Yeah, I feel like this platform, there's like so many act 2 and 3s on top of this thing for an entrepreneurial team.
Absolutely. We called it the urban logistics fabric. We would have been able to get anything and anybody from one part of the city to the next. And that's a lot of money you'd be transporting if you actually did that well.
It's very impressive. It's funny, the mindset like 15 years ago was that like 5 or 10 billion is a really big win. Yeah. And it's kind of funny how it shifted, because now it's like, it's not a really big win if you don't get over 100 billion, which is obnoxious, but that is like the mindset in the Valley amongst, obviously we're spending time with Peter and Elon and all these guys, so it's a different bar, but but it is kind of interesting how Uber could have been like one of the giant tech companies, and it is still a very big win though, obviously.
But look at Lyft. What's the difference between Lyft and Uber? We started at the same time. Lyft is worth $6 billion today. That's a 20x difference. The single difference was leadership and ambition. Right, the only thing you could attribute it to, because they started ride sharing, the UberX equivalent, before we did. Wow. It's because we were more ambitious, we hired better people, and we moved faster.
And you push yourself harder. You guys are probably, the operations were just more intense from everything I saw.
Yeah, that matters.
Yeah, no, it does.
It turns out.
So, Emil, we started the American Optimist to push back on a lot of the cynicism and division we're seeing in America today. Like, what's your best argument to be an optimist on the future of America?
My best argument is, if you surveyed every other person in the world who is living in America now, what's the one country they would want to live in? What system that they think is the best for their children? They would still choose this system. They wouldn't choose China, Russia, Brazil, Indonesia, the other top, Pakistan, the other 5 populous countries. They would choose America still. Mm-hmm. And there's still, whether the southern border thing has some of that element too. Why are they coming here? It's because of the best opportunity. So when people criticize our system, they say it's broken, irredeemable. They're just wrong. Because if they were right, why would all these people want to be coming here? And so it's still the best place in the world for anyone to get a fair shot at success for them and their children. So I'm optimistic that so long as our system continues to attract that people, we must be doing something right. This must be an okay place to live and to raise children and so on. So I think the naysayers are wrong when they say America's best days are behind us.
And what innovation or technologies you're seeing right now are exciting you the most about the future in terms of a positive version of the future?
I look at the regulations that the EU is trying to put on AI and everything, and India banned a bunch of tech too, and in South America they can't even develop the tech, and so you're like, where else is the next wave of AI, which is going to produce mass efficiency, mass knowledge dissemination? Nowhere but here. We're going to have the first of everything in this new platform that's building. If you thought about the last platform as the iPhone and apps, mobility, this next platform of AI is going to be innovated on here faster, with more money and more direction than anywhere else in the world. And, I do worry about the Chinese brute forcing it and using it only for CCP purposes. And we have to be careful not to regulate ours so that we become secondary to the Chinese, but that's the risk I see out there. But the benefit that I see is going to accrue to our country more than anywhere else.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. That's a great note to end it on, Emil. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's great.